around the age of like 14 or 15, I learned how to play the guitar. I got obsessed with it. I actually went to school for music and then spent like a year or two touring as a professional musician. And then somewhere along the lines, I like realized like I don't want to be spending the rest of my life playing in these same bars with the same, like there were people who were like 40 years old, and at the time I was kind of like in my early 20s, and I remember thinking like I'm gonna be that guy here in like the next 10 to 20 years, and is that really what I want my life to be like? Because the music industry is really hard, right? It's like you're either Katy Perry and you're this multi-millionaire famous musician, or you're like kind of a nobody, and the outcomes are kind of Pareto distributed, right? And so I came to that realization. I was like, okay, I need to do something else. And in fact, I read Taleb's book. It's called Fooled by Randomness. In the book, he talks about the universe of outcomes for like somebody like Katy Perry, for example, and that of a dentist, in order to juxtapose these two distributions, right? A dentist, if you put them in the same universe, 98 times out of 100, they're going to end up with the same outcome because they're a dentist, right? Whereas if you put Katy Perry in the same universe, probably 2 out of 100 times, Katy Perry's going to end up being Katy Perry. So I had that realization. I was like, okay, I need to figure something else out to do. And my dad was an electrical engineer, and so I asked him. I was like, he'd always been like hammered into me, like the importance of mathematics and science and engineering and all this stuff. And so, like, even though I was a musician, I had taken calculus in high school and all this other stuff at his request. So I asked him, I was like, hey, should I go into engineering and kind of like follow in your footsteps? And he actually told me no. He was like, no, do computer science, because he spent decades as an electrical engineer. And his argument was basically like, to do electrical engineering, you need like one genius PhD, and then he comes up with the idea, and like then they go off and like replicate the idea using assembly lines or something like that. He said, but whereas with computer science, you can't just have like one brilliant software engineer. You need a whole bunch of engineers to like build stuff, right? And so it's almost like the dentist thing, right? You're more likely to be able to have like a regular, stable, paying job as a software engineer versus electrical engineering has a similar Pareto distribution to like to a musician, for example. And so I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. I kind of like took the advice of my dad. And in fact, when I went back to school, got a degree in computer science the second time around, and at that point I remember telling my friends, like, I don't really care about this. Like, I just need to get like a solid, I kept hearing about all these people with like remote jobs and like how developers don't work that hard and all this other stuff. And so I was like, I just want to do that. What happened though is I got obsessed with it, and now like I don't do it for the money. I'm just like totally obsessed with programming and software engineering and all that stuff. So at some point, it started off that way, and then eventually it's become more of a passion than something I do for money or something like that. Anyway, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that answered greatly, by the way. And let's keep on your journey a little bit. How does a musician that became a software engineer ends up at Amazon? Amazon is known for having a hard, hiring process, a lot of interviews. I mean, how that happened? Can you tell us the story a little bit of you ending up at Amazon?
Yeah, definitely. I will say that I do think being a musician really helped me out in terms of development, because sort of towards the end of my career as a musician, I was actually making more money as like a producer for other musicians than I was as like creating the music myself. But I learned a lot about like how one of the IDs, or can't even remember what it's the equivalent of an IDE for music production. I can't remember what they're called. But it's called Ableton. So I knew Ableton really, really well. And often in like modern music, in like electronic music and stuff like that, what you're doing is you're like taking samples of like drum beats or guitar music or keyboards or something like that, and you're sort of taking these small chunks of sound and you're iterating on those, and like you could think of it as like a for loop in some sense, right, where you're looping over that, And then those tiny samples get built up into like larger sections, like a verse or a chorus or a bridge or whatever, right? And then those get looped together into like a bigger thing that turns into a song. And then obviously you make albums, right? And so those sort of concepts that we all know and love as software engineers, you're actually applying them as a musician. And but the trick is that so okay, you have to have like the ability to like play notes on an instrument, right? It's very similar to like understanding the syntax of a language, but that's not sufficient to take the next leap. You have to be creative, right? Otherwise, there's plenty of people who are like playing like death metal who can like really shred the guitar or whatever, but nobody's listening to their music because there's no creativity there, right? You could be think of that similar to somebody who really knows the syntax of a language but doesn't really know how to build valuable programs or something like this, right? So I think that mindset of like creativity juxtaposed with the actual act of sitting down and programming is actually what made me a really good programmer. Surprisingly, I wasn't expecting that to be the case, but it ended up working out quite nicely. I also, because I had like kind of mastered my instrument at the time, I was a guitar player. What I had learned is the art of like mastering something, and so I could take all the things that I had learned at the time from mastering an instrument and reapply them to master this new thing that I was learning, which was software engineering. And in fact, I remember the first time I ever picked up a guitar, how hard it was and how I'd almost given up like 3 or 4 times. I had like broken strings when I was like learning how to tune the guitar, like all these things. And I had that same exact feeling when I was learning how to program for the first time. It was like really hard at the beginning to wrap my head around concepts. But this time around, I didn't give up because I knew. I was like, oh, this is exactly the same feeling I had learning play an instrument, and I know that eventually I'll get through that to the other end and I'll be able to program it. It will all be fine, and I'll look back and laugh about the fact that I didn't understand syntax or I didn't understand what a for loop was or whatever. So I know that's a long story short, but so okay, I got to college, and I was I like I said, at some point I'd gotten sort of obsessed, like the last year of my computer science degree, because what happens is like in the computer science curriculum, the first classes are super boring. I was already programming as like a freelance programmer at the time, and so like the first classes were trivial for me. They weren't challenging at all. But then like the last year or so of a computer science degree, they're really fun. It's like app development, or you're doing ML, or you're doing web development or whatever, right? So that was when I got really excited about what I was doing. It went from this like thing I was just doing for money to something I was really passionate about. And what had happened is I think I read Gal Lockman McDowell's book, which is called Cracking the Coding Interview. I'm sure you guys have all heard of it. And in the book, she basically, it's like the introduction of the book, she's like, everybody should get into a FAANG and then leave a FAANG. She was saying like, you need to get that on your resume. You need to learn the principles. You need to be able to crack these interviews. But then once you're there, you shouldn't just stay there and like make that your entire career. You should leave immediately. And so I kind of took that to heart because that's what she had done. I think she worked at Google and maybe Microsoft or something like that. And then she went off and started her own business around this idea of like interview preparation. And so that became my kind of goal. I was like, okay, well, let me just like do that as an experience just to say that I'd done it. And then I can go do something else after that. And so my last like year of college was just purely like, in fact, I was working at a Department of Defense company, and I kind of lied to them. I was like, oh, my classes are getting really hard. Like, I need to just like take this semester off or whatever. But really what I was doing is I was trying to free up as much time as I could to just focus on these coding interviews. So I did that, really cranked hard. I basically applied everywhere I could think to apply. I applied to Amazon, I applied to Google, I applied to Facebook, I applied to IBM, I applied to, like any company that had any sort of software engineering positions open, I send an application. And part of it was like thinking, I need to just do a lot of interviews in order to like prepare myself for the process of being nervous in an interview and still being able to get an answer out and these sorts of things. So I did a bunch of interviews, I got a bunch of offers, I got a bunch of rejections. Notably, I got rejected from Google. I had gotten flown out, did an on-site there. I distinctly remember the question that I wasn't able to answer, and I got back home and I was like, wait a second, I was right. But the interviewer had challenged me and kind of confused me, and I wasn't confident enough in myself to say like, no, this is correct. And so anyway, that lesson learned there is like,
Crazy.
you're right, you're right. Like, you be confident in yourself and say that, okay, I was right. Anyway, so yeah, I did the whole Amazon thing, was part of the interview loop. Somehow I managed to get an offer there. It was very strange, though, I have to be honest. So most of these companies, they give you like a pre-interview screen, kind of, right? And so Google had one, Amazon had one. So I took Amazon's pre-interview screen, and then they sent me another one, and I was like, and it was weird. It was this very weird thing where it was like a work simulation. So part of it was like I was in meetings with people, and there was like a pop-up that would be like, hey, what would you do in this situation? And it would give you a multiple choice. It was like a choose your own adventure sort of a thing. Okay, you go to this person to ask them a question. Like, here's their response. Now, how do you? And and then after that, there was like a coding thing. So I got all that done, and I did really well in the coding thing. But in my head, I thought this is just another pre-screen thing, and I was quite annoyed because I was like, wow, like Google didn't even have two pre-screens. Like, I did well in their first pre-screen, and they flew me out immediately. Like, why is Amazon making this a much harder problem here? And then, like, maybe a month or so after that pre-screen, they just sent me an offer letter, and I was like, what the fuck?
Nice.
So apparently at that time they were struggling so much hiring people that I learned this internally once I was inside the company, because I was starting to do these where basically what they would do is they would look over like a simulation of you working through the problem, and if like a more senior engineer looks at it and you pass all the test cases and you pass the harder, because what they did is that I even looked online. I was like, okay, I knew before I did the simulation there was going to be two coding questions, so I did the two coding questions and I still had like maybe 15 minutes left, and then they gave me another coding question. I was like, what the fuck is this shit? And it was a really hard one, and I only got like maybe half the test cases passed. But I think that what had happened is I'd done so well in their two coding questions that they sent me this like bonus one, and then I'd done well enough on the bonus one that they were just like, okay, we don't need to fly this guy out. Like, we're ready to send him an offer directly. I remember opening the email. I was in like a statistics class or something, and like seeing the offer, and I was like, oh, this is the most money I've ever seen in my life. Like, it's crazy.
Celebration night,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I was like texting family members and all that other stuff. So yeah, and then they flew me. I was still waiting to hear back from the Google offer, and so I flew out to like orientation at Amazon, but I still hadn't signed my offer letter. And the problem is, like, until you sign the offer letter, you can't join a team. And so I had a list of what they did is they sent me a list of teams, and they were like, just pick a team that you want to work for, and we'll make it happen, and just sign the offer letter. But I was waiting to hear back from Google because I thought maybe I'd be able to like pair the offers against each other. I also, I preferred to work at Google than to Amazon, at least at the time. And so all the team, they got like one of the teams I wanted to work on was I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but there's this just walk out store. They call it the Go store or whatever. It's this like payless technology where they've got, back when I lived in Seattle, they're kind of all over Seattle. So I wanted to work on that team initially because I'd done a lot of C++ when I was in college, and there was a lot of C++ in that code base. That team went away. There was another one called Amazon Tickets, was basically like a Ticketmaster competitor that they ended up shutting down. That was another one I wanted to work on. That team got filled up by the time I signed the offer letter, there was like maybe 4 teams left, and one of them was called Pyramid, and it was basically like AML, KYC sort of stuff inside of Amazon, and so that was the team I actually ended up joining with. I was a little kind of bummed out by that, but then once I got there, I was like, well, it's okay, I have a lot to learn. Obviously, I didn't know that I had a lot to learn until I joined Amazon, then I was like, it's like drinking from a fire hose. You're like, holy shit, there's a lot of stuff here. So anyway, long story short, I know I keep rambling, but I'm guessing you guys are okay with the rambling.
Yeah, that's really nice, man. And so, starting working with AML and everything, KYCs, was that what brought you into crypto?
Yeah, so how did I get into crypto, right? It's a great question. So, so I was actually doing a lot of ML in college, and I had a bunch of like really interesting side projects, and I actually had an offer to work at Micron as a data scientist. But then this Amazon offer came in, and I took that instead because Amazon was more interesting to me than I was like, well, I'd rather be a software engineer at Amazon than a data scientist at Micron. And so I was really into ML at the time, and I joined that particular organization, because they were doing a lot of ML work. Like one of the things I was working on was we were trying to detect money laundering on the Amazon platform. So we were doing like a lot of graph sort of like, basically we're trying to find connected components inside of a massive graph, right? Every transaction that ever happened on Amazon, you're trying to see like, is there any sort of collusion between these people, right? Because one way people try to do money laundering on the Amazon platform is like they put something up for sale and then they buy it from themselves from a different account, for example, right? So that was like really, there was a lot of really interesting engineering challenges in that organization. One thing they also did was the AML KYC stuff, right? Because it was all sort of compliance related, but then one aspect of it had a lot of ML, and I was fortunate enough to work on a team that was doing some of the ML stuff. But what I had learned was, so I wasn't actually doing the training the algorithms myself. Primarily, my team was like building software that was supporting these data scientists. They were only hiring people with PhDs in ML to work on machine learning at Amazon, at least at the time. I think they started to open that up to more people, but that was kind of how it was back, whatever it was, 6 years ago. And what I saw was like how these data scientists were working, and I was like, wow, this is not exciting at all. I was like, this is not what I want to do, because they were primarily spending most of their time finding valuable variables to feed into the algorithms, and the actual algorithms themselves had to be explainable because they were for compliance reasons. So you had to be able to go to like a regulator and say, here's how we came up with this decision on a particular user on the platform, right? So you couldn't do neural net, black box sort of stuff like what they're doing at OpenAI because of this explainability problem. Now we were working on this, like how do we make them explainable so that we can make the models better, but that was sort of one of the limitations. And so when your model itself is somewhat crude, then the only thing that you can like really tweak is the inputs to it. And so they were spending a bunch of time sort of like data munging and data diving, trying to like they were kind of like, you could think of them as like data engineers who also happen to know statistics. And I was like, it's not interesting to me at all. And like I said, I had this thing about that Lachlan McDowell had told me in that book at the beginning, which was like, you should try and leave the FAANG like kind of as soon as you can. And I remember telling my manager, like, I'm only going to be here for a year. I didn't want to pay back the signing bonus or the the relocation stipend. So I was like, they have like a year clause in your contract when you sign that. So I was like, okay, I'll do Amazon for a year and then I'll get out of there. And so during like, as soon as I joined the company, I was looking for an off ramp. I was like, how do I get out of here? And I thought perhaps that I maybe wanted like a consultant role or something like that, where I could like start my own consulting business, work my own hours, charge kind of whatever I wanted. And I was looking around, I was like, okay, there's sort of two nascent technologies out there right now. One of them's ML and the other one's blockchain. This was like right around the time the Ethereum ICO had just happened. They had like just launched Ethereum. And so like because of my experience in the ML stuff, I was like, I think I want to do this crypto thing. I've always, my dad kind of was really interested in cryptography. I can't speak too much to my dad was in the military as this electrical engineer, so I can't speak too much to like what he was actually doing in the military, but it involved a lot of like crypto analysis.
Okay.
And so he had sort of taught me how interesting cryptography could be, this sort of stuff. And so this was like really interesting space. And so I started moving in that direction so I started like blogging a lot about, like this was like Dfinity had still not launched, and so I was writing a lot about like Dfinity's consensus algorithm. I was writing a lot about like proof of work versus proof of stake, because there was still a lot of like argument going on around these. Yep, exactly. Ethereum was still proof of work back then, right? And they were just starting to talk about like, okay, we're going to move to proof of stake, and here's how we're going to do it. This was like they had the Casper, the friendly finality gadget, and all that. Right? They've since moved away from all that, but that was sort of how they were thinking of proof of stake back then. Anyway, so I used that blogging to sort of start getting some of my own clients, and it was working out quite well. Some of my early clients was like Aave. Aave back then was called ETHLend. I worked for EOS, if you're familiar with them, back in the day. They were like kind of the original Solana. I worked for them because I was bought into this idea that like maybe you could trade off centralization with decentralization, kind of how they're thinking about things with Solana. I learned a lot of valuable lessons working at EOS, which we could maybe dive into. Yeah. But that was how I kind of made the transition from Amazon to crypto, and I just sort of kept doing that consulting work the entire time I was at Amazon. And then what happened is eventually I was like, I'm done working at Amazon. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going to go to crypto full time. And then, eventually we can sort of talk about how I made that transition.
That's amazing story. So you saw most of the protocols, and you saw also most of the industry changing, right, in aspects of development. Because if you're doing that since 17, especially on Ethereum, not a lot of people were doing that, right? Did you saw the DAO hack?
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of, so frankly, I was like I wasn't an anti-Ethereum person, but I was not like an Ethereum maxi. Frankly, I've sort of switched my thinking around to, I mean, I would call myself maybe like an EVM maxi is the way I would think of it. But I remember thinking the DAO hack, what happened is like they had to hard fork, right? And there was Ethereum Classic and Ethereum, as we know it today. And there was a lot of argument around like, okay, well, is this really decentralized if like the core developers can get together and get all the miners to just fork the protocol anytime there's a hack? Like, there was this whole, that was like the inception of the code is law argument, right? That had started at the DAO hack. And I kind of actually aligned with the Ethereum Classic people. Like, I wasn't in the space at that time. That was when I had started switched over to EOS. So it was almost like we were looking at the Ethereum people and kind of laughing at them and being like, dude, you can't just fork it whenever you guys get hacked. Like, that's not fair. Right? It hasn't happened since then, but that was sort of the big debate that was going on at the time. But yeah, it was like really crazy the DAO hack. And even back then, I wasn't really that interested in security. We can sort of talk about how I got into security, but back then I wasn't that interested. I was just like, oh, that seems highly complex. It was the first re-entrancy attack. And so it was like, oh wow, somebody's like really, really smart to have figured that out. And really, if you think about it, the first person to think about reentrancy had to have been like a really smart person. And I think since then, Laura Shannon has kind of like doxed the person. I think there's still some questions around like, who the actual person is.
Kind of no, but it's
yeah.
not confirmed.
Yeah, right. So anyway, so the DAO hack. I mean, that was I would say the biggest thing about like sticking in the same technology for a long period of time is that you get to see it all unfold before your eyes. So like I said, eFund was one of my first clients, and they sort of eventually pivoted into Aave. And I remember writing blog posts for them and like I was doing like these interesting little POCs where it was like people working on identity all the way back then. And so it was like, could you use a identity to like back a loan or like price a loan on the eFund platform, right? So I was writing POCs for that and then like writing blog posts about it for them. And I remember the whole time thinking this DeFi thing is like so stupid and it's not going to work out, and why it's so inefficient, and why would anybody do it this way? And then like it blew up in my face. I was like, oh, so I got to go from like being a skeptic a little bit about like how is this actually going to play out to seeing it actually unfold and become like billions of dollars of an industry. At the time, the reason I was sort of confused by it is at the time eFund was they weren't doing pools. The concept of like pools was still very early. Like Maker was just barely starting out, and so they were doing peer-to-peer matching of the loans. And so there was like hardly any liquidity. It was like very hard to get two people to match up on the agreement of a loan because it was like you had to pick a very particular. Somebody had to put like I want a loan at this rate, and somebody had to come and agree to the loan at that rate, right? So it didn't make any sense until the pooling thing gets put in, and they're like, oh, now like the whole thing blows wide open once the idea of like, pools comes up. But at the time, people weren't really doing that, and so I was like, there's no way this is going to work. But obviously, it's been like MEV is another one. Like I had no idea MEV was going to be like such a massive industry, and that whole thing like grew right in front of my face. So you learn a lot just from sticking around long enough and paying attention to a lot of the trends.
But you gotta believe in it, right? Because right now we're in the middle of the bear market, maybe recovering a little bit. There's almost no jobs. You see a lot of people booming into security because they need to get better at Solidity, and because they need to get a job. So definitely there's a factor of believing and staying in the market for, like you're saying, having resilience, right? I want to talk.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go on.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to talk a little bit about the EOS stuff, the EOS situation, right? Because that was quite tricky.
Yeah, this isn't recorded, is it?
If you want, we can skip this question to something less problematic, like when you're getting into security and so on.
Yeah, I just don't want to. I don't want to bash the community too heavily, but let's just say there's a reason why I left, and it was very interesting to see the whole thing sort of dismantle from the inside, and also that. I mean, obviously they tried to headhunt me away from Amazon, and I managed to stay at Amazon instead, and kind of like I took on a consulting, kind of like a remote consulting role instead of joining EOS full time, and I was like really glad that I did that when I saw the implosion starting to happen.
That's crazy.
But yeah, I don't want to say any more
No
about
problem.
that.
No problem. No problem. So let's talk a little bit about how you got into security.
Can I interrupt at this moment and ask if it's a good idea to have an off-the-record section at the end of the interview? So that might also...
Yeah, but
like,
someone else can be recording, right? So it's really hard for us to know that, there's no one recording.
It's not recorded right now.
Yeah, so let's keep on.
Okay.
So talking a little bit about security, how did you get into this, bro?
We could maybe like a smaller section of people if they're interested after, right? We could all jump to a separate call if we really want to do like an off the record sort of a thing. Like I don't mind, and I'm not going to say anything like incriminating or anything like that, right? It's just that the thing is like I'm biased. I'm very biased, and I don't want to say like something that if like someone who's a supporter of EOS and believes in EOS isn't here to defend themselves, right? It's almost like I'm just like beating a straw man or something like that, which I feel is like intellectually dishonest. So it's not that I'm going to say anything like nefarious or illegal or anything. It feels unfair to start bashing on those guys. Yeah, security. So this EOS was starting to crumble, in my opinion. I should say all of the stuff I've said about EOS is just my opinion. And I started looking around, and it became clear, like I said, I started rethinking about, like, okay, I think the EVM is kind of here to stay. There was all these, like, L1 forks, right? You had, like, Polygon and Avalanche and Binance Smart Chain, right, all using the EVM. And so I was like, okay, obviously you want to be, like, an expert in the EVM at this point going forward. And this was kind of around the time of DeFi summer. And so we were having like people throwing like way too much money into these protocols, and then hacks happening every single day. And initially I got interested in security because I was like, I want to go launch my own project. But I know that if I do that, I need to take security very seriously. I need to understand security like very well. So I went off and was like, okay, because Solidity itself is a very simple language, right? You could probably learn all the syntax you need to know about Solidity in like a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on your skill level. But that's not sufficient though, right? Like you need to understand all the foot guns that you're gonna run into if you go to launch your own protocol. And so that was where I started spending a lot of my time, because I was like, okay, once I understand security really well, then I'll come back and build my own project. And what happened is I read some Christophe Michel was doing these like hack replay things on his blog, and so I was like learning a lot about the existing hacks from his blog. And I remember I DM'd him on Twitter and I was like, hey, dude, your blog is like phenomenal, like really great work on this. And then I think as I was looking at his blog, I noticed he was also in the EOS space. He was doing like training stuff, which is actually how block.one, who started EOS, found me and hired me. As I was doing the same thing he was doing. I had like a course on Udemy that was doing really well, and they're like, okay, let's bring this guy on as like a developer advocate or something like that. And so we started talking about EOS and security and all this other stuff. And at the time he was working at QuantStamp, and he was like, do you want to work at QuantStamp with me? And I was like, I never thought that like maybe I could become a smart contract auditor myself. I just was like, I know I need to learn security because it's very important, but I probably am not good enough to like go find these bugs myself. But when he asked me that, I was like, oh shit, like that's all it takes to become a smart contract, at least back then. The market's changed. This was in the middle of a bull market, right? And so things have changed, and like more people are now aware of security and like how lucrative it is and stuff like that. But at the time, I mean, you really didn't need to know that much to get into security. And so I was like, well, I don't feel like I'm ready to do an interview at QuantStamp yet, but like, let me get back to you. But yeah, I was like, I definitely would like to. I think I was working on a startup at the time too, so I only had so much time. So what happened is eventually came back to this idea of like working with him at QuantStamp. I started studying for the interview, and I had written up a blog post where it was like, I might be able to find it and like dump it in the Discord or something like that. But it was, I think if you Google top 5 Solidity code smells or something like that, it'll show right up. And so I'd written this up while I was studying for the interview. And at the bottom, I had put like, if you're looking for a security person or just a developer who understands security or whatever, like just DM me or send an email here or whatever. Can't remember what the tagline was exactly, but it went kind of viral. It ended up getting like, I think 5,000 or 6,000 hits. And I had a bunch of smart contract auditing companies like start pinging me about doing work for them. And this was around the time I was thinking I was going to leave Amazon. I thought I was going to like just go start my own protocol or something like that. And then I got all this inbound and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, okay, maybe I'll be a smart contract auditor. So I had a couple of offers that I was actually going to sign, and I was going to go be a smart contract auditor full time and leave Amazon. And then I had my daughter around this time, and so I was on paternity leave. I had a bunch of time on my hands. And a recruiter from Robinhood reached out and was like, hey, we want to hire for staff position at Robinhood. Are you interested? And so I was like, yeah, I'll do the interview because I have all this time on my hands anyway. And I was planning on leaving Amazon anyway. So I did that. Long story short, I ended up joining Robinhood. But I was like, I still want to do security. Like, I'm really very interested in this. And so how can I continue to do this without being an auditor full time? And that was when I found some of these other firms that were hiring sort of freelance auditors. I didn't even know about C4 or anything like that until like maybe 6 months or so into my journey as a smart contract auditor. So I probably would have just done that instead, but where I was like already making money and working freelance for these other people, I just have kind of kept doing that instead. But anyway, that's how I made the transition kind of from traditional backend engineering into security. I'm still doing traditional backend engineering at Robinhood, and then on like nights and weekends, I'm doing smart contract auditing.
That's very interesting, man. And maybe, I don't know if you have some sort of thought about this, but in security, especially Web3 security, everybody seems to be so open, I remember sending you a DM like 5 months ago, say, hey bro, can you get me a job or something? And you answered me, you replied me, you say, hey, right now I can't, but maybe in the future let's talk. And right then I saw that everybody in this space is quite open, and we have things such as yAcademy. We just saw Parth, Moonsoon. I think you work with him getting in at Open Zeppelin, which is amazing. Why do you think we have this spirit of sharing the information?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you would think that this is another. We really need to do an off-the-record conversation because I have some more alpha that I can spill. But what I will say is it's not always the case. There are quite a few people who are treating this like business, which they probably should be doing, right? But I think it's a kind of a difference between the business people and the people running the businesses and the smart contract auditors. I think the auditors themselves, we're primarily driven by interesting tech and interesting bugs and keeping people safe and whatever, right? Whereas the business people are primarily motivated by their business and their revenue and whatever, right? And so they might be less apt to share something. But anyway, yeah, I think, I guess that answers your question. I would say that's probably why, because most of us are more interested in the technology. And frankly, I saw Andy's interview with Zach was last week or whatever, and Zach was saying the same thing. He was like, I just got into this because I wanted to find the most interesting and intellectually stimulating thing I could work on, and then the money just happened to also come as a consequence of that. I definitely agree with that 100%. I really I remember telling yAcademy that actually no, I think it was Oak Security when they were interviewing me. I was like, I'll work for free. I just want to know what it's like to be. I had studied all the security stuff, but I didn't know what did it take to actually produce an audit report or anything like that. And so I was like, I just want to see what it's like to be an auditor. What, if you guys just let me tag along and learn what I can, I'm more than happy to do that. But the thing is everybody feels it's capitalism, right? People feel like, you should get paid for the work that you're doing, and they're happy to pay for it, right? Whether it's via the contest or, paying an auditing firm to like keep the auditing firm alive and, sustainable. People are willing to pay the money to do it if you're good.
Awesome. And since we're in a security group, I want you to give us some auditing alpha, something that you learned after a long time, maybe about approaching big code bases, maybe about dealing with math, maybe about fuzzling.
Yeah. I think I have a YouTube video up about my like auditing approach and like kind of the way I go about breaking down a large code bases, because it can seem daunting, I think, when the first time you open up like a really large code base. I think one of the things I like about Oak is like usually the code bases are like relatively small, and so before I think I'd audited at Oak for like 4 or 5 months before I joined yAcademy. And so it was almost like a training ground before I got into like the really big code bases that we audited at yAcademy.
Everyone.
Spearbit. But the way I tend to do it is almost like a depth first search, if you're familiar with that sort of an algorithm. I go to the very ends of the dependency tree and I kind of start. Well, actually, what I do first is I just get like a high level overview of the code base. And I'll drop any comment that possibly like pops into my mind. I'll drop it as an audit comment. And then sometimes as I'm going through that high level overview, what I'll be able to do is like answer my own audit comment. I'll go back and fix it and say, okay, this is actually fine because of this reason over here on this code base or whatever, right? And then once I do that first pass, then yeah, I start the second pass, in more seriousness through this depth first search approach. Once I go through all that, then I've sort of like refined, maybe I'll drop 100 comments, right? And then by the time I do the second pass, those comments will be whittled down to like maybe 10 or 20. And then those 10 or 20, I spend a lot of time, usually in Foundry, just trying to like make those hacks actually concrete and have a POC. Although you don't always need a POC when you're writing an audit report, right? Obviously, a lot of these are like Immunify, for example, right? They're not going to accept a bug bounty unless you have a POC. So I tend to hold myself to that level of a high standard. Also, because I'm a developer, right? So it's really easy for me to spin up POCs and like just hack on stuff via code. Not all auditors are that way, though. So yeah, and then sometimes I will do fuzzing depending on like what sort of code. Like one particular case I can think of is somebody had rewritten some like Uniswap util code in Yule, and we wanted to confirm that like it functioned the same as the Uniswap code in all cases. And so like I fuzzed that. And then very recently Foundry has they've launched this invariant testing stuff. And I just barely used that on the last audit I did at yAcademy for the timeless finance guys, where there was a particular invariant in their app contracts that we wanted to prove that the contracts always never held a balance because they were supposed to be somewhat stateless, and it was like trivially easy for an attacker to withdraw the balance if there ever was a balance on the contract. And so I wrote some invariant tests for that and gave them to them. I don't know if they're actually using them in their code base, but so yeah, I mean that's kind of. Long story short, that's how I do it. If there are follow-up questions about like anything in particular, though, I'm very happy to answer those.
Awesome, man. And something else I want to talk about a little bit. We're almost ending. I'm going to open for questions. Is what is the difference between working on a centralized environment and a decentralized environment? Because you work on both Robinhood and also did a lot of crypto projects. Tell me a little bit about what changes.
Yeah, I'm. I think some of my coworkers at Robinhood think that I'm a little bit blasé about code reviews because it is like a much less stressful environment, right? Because like, especially if your company has CI/CD, it's like, or canary analysis or anything like this, right? It's like you can ship a bug, and like, mind you, we're dealing with customer funds at Robinhood, right? It's very similar to smart contracts in that regard, right? But even then, I'm still somewhat blasé because I'm like, well, we can just roll the bug back, and like, absolute worst case, let's say a customer loses some money, we can always like refund the money or something like this, right? Because usually it's a very small sum of money because it's like a race condition or something like this, right? So yeah, it's I mean, you juxtapose that with smart contracts and it's like night and day, right? I've heard people suggest that like it's more like writing aircraft software or rocket software or something like this, right? Because once it's on the rocket, like there's no updating it. It's on the rocket. So yeah, I think people need to be way more careful, and for that reason, I'm way more paranoid when I'm like auditing versus like doing it. I also think that one of the things I really dislike about smart contract development is that it's a big, massive chunk that gets audited, whereas in centralized software settings, you're supposed to send out very small incremental code changes because you have the CI/CD infrastructure. So you can manage. You're basically supposed to leverage that to write very small code, and so it's very easy to. It's much easier to reason about what the author of the code is intending to do when it's just like maybe one class or one contract or one function and it has all these unit tests, so it's very easy. Whereas here, it's like there's like you can get sometimes audits with tens of thousands of lines of code, and so it's extremely easy to miss stuff. In fact, I remember the first time I missed something in an audit was a couple months ago, and I was like, wow, I just totally like didn't. I was trying to like kind of do a post mortem and go, why did I miss this? And I just was like, I just straight up missed it. There was really no excuse, and I realized like just how easy it is to miss stuff in the smart contract audit.
Really easy, and one thing a lot of people don't talk about is how hard and how crushing auditing is. It's a really tough job. It's much better, in my view, to make 150K as a developer than to make 250K as an auditor, in my view. Of course, that may change from persons to persons, because this is really hard job, really hard.
I remember, I think Christoph wrote a blog post. It's like somewhat recently, I think, where he was basically saying that he was getting out of C4, and he said something to that effect, like he was going to get into development because it's more relaxing or whatever. It's really kind of funny, right? I definitely agree with him, but it's kind of funny to think that like most regular people who are not in software engineering would think that like writing code is stressful as fuck. But auditors are like, oh, it's like taking a vacation just to go and ship code instead of have to audit it. Which frankly, I did not treat it that way. Like when I first started audit, because I had always considered myself like a junior auditor. I was like, I'm just here to learn and like catch as many bugs as I can. And then at some point, for whatever reason, the community started looking at me as somebody more than just a junior auditor. And I started to and like some of my reports started to get like massive amounts of retweets from the protocols. And I started to realize like how many people are looking at the reports that I'm authoring that have my name on it. And then the game shifts dramatically. It goes from just like something you're doing on the weekends for the hell of it. And like if you miss something, so what, it's the protocol's fault, to like, oh shit, like I don't want my name on the report. If this protocol gets hacked and loses millions of dollars, that's going to be embarrassing as hell.
It's true, bro. I'm going to make one last question, then I'm going to open 4 questions from everybody here. So think on your questions. My last question for you, bro, is what do you think about non-EVM ecosystems?
So Oak Security, one of the auditing firms I work for, does a lot of Cosmosm style work. And I think for that reason, they also get a lot of inbound from a lot of other non-EVM chains. There's a security guy who works with me at Robinhood, and I think he's transitioned out of auditing, but for a while there, he was making quite a bit of money doing Solana audits. And I think maybe the reason he's transitioned out of there is like, I'm sure the volume has gone down with the SBF stuff in the Solana ecosystem. I think that's part of the problem, right? Is like, that was one of my experiences with EOS, right? Is like, if you bet heavily on a non-EVM chain, that non-EVM chain really needs to win for it to pay off. Otherwise, you're going to end up, because I set my career back by, I think I was working for those guys for like 2 years. I set my career back for like 2 years while these other people who had just like bet on the EVM that ended up winning, they're all like, they don't even work anymore. Because like Stanny, I worked with Stanny, who's the founder of Aave. I was a consultant for Aave. He's like probably like a billionaire now or whatever, right? He doesn't have to like go do smart contract auditing like I do. So I would say I'd be very, very careful, but it can be, what I would say is it can be very lucrative in the short term because hardly anybody's willing to make that bet to move on to a non-EVM chain, and so you can make a lot of money. But be careful because, right, I think the EVM is here to stay, and it's going to be here to stay for a very long time. And so if you're going to gather expertise on it, you stand to make money for a very long time and maybe grow your career for a very long time. But you're sort of flattening out your pay, right? You can either make a lot of money in the short term and do a non-EVM chain, and if it implodes, kind of like Cosmosm did with the Terra Luna stuff, then you're going to lose a bunch of money in that regard. Or you can sort of flatten out your pay and make it for much longer doing EVM stuff. There's also like way more EVM work than there is non-EVM work.
I do love the EVM, but I do think we need to start supporting ecosystems outside the EVM. I believe, like, if you look at something like Polkadot, they've been doing some amazing work for quite some time. And it's really important to bring attention, to what's happening in there, because if you compare the machines, Ethereum, the node itself, the client, with Polkadot works much better. But for some reason, and I suspect that this is some heavy lobbying that we have in the space, it seems to like the developers are not making the move,
Yeah, Cosmos is doing a lot of really interesting work too. There's a reason why I switched over to EOS when I did, is like the TPS that you were seeing from those nodes was like far outpaced EOS. But that was sort of the lesson I learned, is like tech isn't everything. You like as an engineer, you tend to get suckered into like fancy tech out. Like I think I mentioned I was writing blog posts for Dfinity too, right? Like they were doing a lot of really interesting cryptography in their consensus layer. So it was really easy for me to be like, wow, this is so cool, and learn a lot about their cryptography. But yeah, I think that's fine if you go into it with your eyes wide open, knowing like, okay, there's a very real chance that Polkadot's not going to win, but I'm very interested in the tech and I want to work in this space nonetheless. Then that's great, but there are some risks that are going to come with that.
Yeah, great, man. Now, anybody has a question to Jackson?
Don't be shy. Is this one in the chat?
Yeah, I have one question here from GSM. So he's been learning Web2 bug bounty for the past 2 months, but he noticed a lot of competition in the field. Now he's interested in learning Web3 bug bounty, but he's not sure if it's worth the time and effort. And he wants to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And another question I get along with this one is like a lot of people, like I think you mentioned, right, that it's a bear market and there's not a lot of jobs right now. So people are asking the same thing, right? Is like, is it going to pay off if I continue to build through the bear market, and am I going to be able to find work by the end of it? I will say, like, one of my biggest regrets is that like I wasn't fully engaged in the space. Like I was doing this consulting thing on the side, right? And like I said, I watched a lot of people that I worked with became like super wealthy from crypto because they started projects and they stuck with them for a very long time. And it's sort of a dream job, right? You get to work on your own project. It beats the pants off of kind of anything you could get as an actual job. And so I do kind of regret not just continuing to keep my head down and like building throughout all of it and staying around for bear markets. I mean, I was still working during bear markets, but the whole entire time was on like kind of on a part-time basis. To your question about the competitiveness of the space, so I think Mis4thr0pic mentioned that like I have done this like junior auditor funding program. Basically what I've done lately is like I found people who are interested in the space, but they're kind of still dabbling in it, or maybe they found a couple of bugs on C4 or something like this. And what I've done is I've been like, hey, I'll pay for your living expenses while you switch over to this space full time. And like one of the people I funded has managed to get a job as a security researcher at Open Zeppelin. So yeah, it's a bear market. It's competitive, all that stuff. But like, if you're really, really good at this stuff, you're going to be able to find a job. It's just simple as that. Like, regardless of the bear market, regardless of how competitive it is, it just really purely, when it comes to security, is purely about being really, really good and being able to find really, really hard bugs, because just very, very few people are able to do that.
Another question that I have here from Scroll: if you were to start all over again, what do you do differently?
Yeah, I love that question. Probably, yeah. So the first thing is I would not have pivoted to EOS. I wouldn't have got, like I said, I got sort of suckered in by the technology. I wouldn't have done that. And then probably I would have spent more time starting my own businesses rather than working as an engineer at other businesses, because like I said, I watched all these industries flourish right before my very eyes. My part of my problem is that I love software and software engineering, and I'm like kind of a nerd, and so I tend to just be like, who cares? I want to code things, or I'm kind of doing the same thing at Robinhood right now. Like, it'd probably be better off for me long term to go start my own business, but I'm very interested in the non-custodial wallet that I'm working on at Robinhood, and so I'm like, I'll just defer starting my own company so that I can continue to own this wallet or whatever. So yeah, I would say those are two things I would probably do over again if I could go back in time.
Awesome. Amania is asking, where is the alpha outside of Solidity? Is writing circuits? Is in that foundry? Security tools?
Yeah, this is I think going back to my original point about like don't get too enamored with new technologies and thinking that it's going to be like your competitive advantage or whatever. This goes back to the first person's question about it being competitive. What I would say is like it's like any sort of market, right? It's competitive for a reason, and that reason is there's a lot of work and it's very lucrative work, and it's probably net positive for you to just go compete in that arena and become one of the top 1% in that field than it is to like try and bet on a trend and get out ahead of everybody else. Again, going back to my EOS experience, this was the lesson that I learned there. It's like I thought basically the reason they hired me is like I was the very first person doing any sort of educational material on their platform before they had even launched like a public mainnet or anything like that. I was already teaching people about how to do EOS smart contract development. And the reason I did that is I was like, this is clearly going to win, and I want to be the first one. I want to be like Andreas Antonopoulos or like Patrick Collins or whatever, right? I wanted to be that person in the EOS space. And it blew up in my face, like I said, right? I wasted like 1.5 to 2 years on this new technology that didn't end up panning out. So I would say be careful about it. And it's not bad to do it, right? Like I'm learning all the CK stuff myself, and I'm doing a lot of SIRCOM, and I'm, all the stuff you're talking about here. But like the amount of work I'm getting through EVM projects versus ZK projects is like 10 to 1, right? And so it's not enough really to sustain yourself. Like, might that change in the future? Yes, it might. And in that case, you might be very well positioned at that moment in time. But don't go too far down that rabbit hole. Don't like fully invest like I did with the EOS. Try and like, it's okay to dabble and like experiment with it and learn a lot about it, but don't try and like find audits for it right now if they aren't there. They simply aren't there. Another thing I like to do too is I like to let the smart contract auditing firms do the work of like finding the clients and managing the clients and doing all that stuff for me, so I can just focus on smart contract auditing. And that also gives me a good sense of like where the market is in terms of like where is most of the work happening. Is it happening in Cosmosm? Is it happening in ZK? Right? I let them handle all of that, and I just focus on being really good at the tech.
Sweet, bro. Never go all in, right? This is an old rule. Any advice from getting from intermediate to advanced level? Or security specifically?
Yeah, that's hard. So what I will say is like I found that most junior auditors, like the things that they struggle with the most is they're very uncreative about their attack vectors. They kind of just like, one thing they do is they look at the code and they're very focused on syntax, which in my opinion is not that useful, right? Okay, you might find a couple of small low-hanging fruit bugs that in that case where it's like, okay, and they still might be critical, don't get me wrong, right? You can still find critical bugs in syntax where someone's missing a modifier, or they have an off by 1 error, or they're incrementing when they should be subtracting or whatever, right? But those bugs generally tend to be ones that are very easy to find. And for example, if you're doing C4, I've never done C4, but my guess is that a lot of people are going to find the same bugs, and so they're not going to be that lucrative of bugs. The people that break out from junior or whatever auditor to more of a senior auditor are the ones who are thinking in terms of the game theory and then the dependencies that the contracts are using, right? For example, like I don't know if you guys saw the DDoB bug about WETH. I think it was WETH, where I can't remember the details of it, but it was something related to the fallback function of WETH or something like that, and it was a massive billion dollar bug, right? That nobody had found. It had been sitting there on chain for years, and nobody had found it until they went and looked into it, right? It's because they had a deep understanding of the dependencies of a lot of the contracts, right? So those are the sorts of things I would say you should focus on if you're trying to go from intermediate to advanced, is game theory bugs and really understanding the DeFi space and all the dependencies that your contracts are interacting with really well, because those are the bugs that most people are not going to find themselves, especially the developers, right? The developers are often going to find the syntactic bugs themselves before you even get to them.
Yeah, I mean, one last question for you, and we gotta let Jackson go because it's almost 1 hour. Thank you so much, man. And the question from GSM, maybe some people will relate. He wants to start from zero. What would be the advice for beginners?
Buy my Gumroad document.
Yeah, buy the curse, man. I'm gonna send you the link.
But for real, yeah, when you say zero, do you say like you don't know how to program, or do you not know Solidity, or
I think he
like
doesn't know
where are you at?
Solidity.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, obviously that's the first step, is you're gonna have to learn Solidity. You're not gonna be able to hack it if you don't then you're probably gonna need to learn how to code. I think for learning how to program, one thing you can do is Codecademy. That one's pretty good. There's quite a few like Udemy courses. I think Free Code Camp is another one that people highly recommend. I think that's kind of how Patrick Collins got his start, was like he did a massive Solidity bootcamp thing on YouTube. So my Gumroad document assumes you have programming knowledge and that you need to learn Solidity, and then it says skip the Solidity sections if you already know Solidity. But yeah, so that's sort of the advice I could give without knowing about your particular circumstances. Yeah, I do accept crypto. Just DM me on Discord or whatever. I can send you the address.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your course? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to shill it.
No, you can shill it, bro.
That's not the point.
No, please. This is a favor, actually.
Yeah, so the document, it's actually not really a course. I think is one of the things people get a little confused by, is like they're expecting me to have like a video course and stuff like that. One of the things I learned from the EOS material is that like the space changes so quickly that it's very hard to update video format. And so very quickly my EOS course got out of date, and since I was busy working for them, I didn't have time to keep it updated until like the sales started to fall down. So this time around, I just decided to write it up as like a PDF document or like a private repo. And basically what it is, it's all the materials I used to learn how to get into smart contract auditing myself. So I remember when I was learning in the space, it was somewhat daunting, and I didn't really know what resources to go after, and I didn't know I also didn't know like what level I needed to be at to work for a smart contract auditing firm. I didn't know what smart contract auditing firms were out there, right? There's like all these questions that are open when you're first getting started in the space. And so what I did is, like, after I had done my first couple of audits, I think by this time I had joined yAcademy as a resident or whatever, and I realized like, okay, I am a smart contract auditor. Let me go back and like figure out what all the things that I did in order to learn this space, and I wrote them down in a document. So basically, it's like step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. I'm not like giving you any sort of information that doesn't already, all this information is available and free online. I'm sort of just curating it for you because I know that there's a lot of information out there, and it's very hard to figure out, which resources should I be using to learn this material.
Bro, thank you so much for coming up to
there's more questions. I can keep answering.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's go for Michel's question. Can you spreadsheet with resources, and I think he wants the spreadsheet with different resources. He can follow sequentially. Hey, you gotta have to buy the course, right? We'll be joining.
Escrow's saying he's bought it already, right?
Yeah, he bought it already.
Oh yeah, you're saying that like you can't do like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, right? You can unmute. Like, don't be shy.
Scroll, if you want to talk, open. He can talk. He just said it.
Misha said it. Okay, sorry. I thought it was Escrow.
So
yeah, sorry.
We also have a question by Dexter, which is a blockchain security engineer and an auditor the same?
Yeah, it's just two words for the same. Another one is like security researcher or whatever. I think, auditor is probably a terrible name. Like, I remember when I first did that last round or the first round of junior auditor funding that I did. I had like financial analysts in my Twitter DMs. Who were like financial auditors were like, how do I get into this lucrative space? And I was like, do you know how to program? And they're like, no. So yeah, I think people conflate, like, it's a terrible name for what we're doing when we call it smart contract auditing or smart contract auditor or whatever, right? And so I think that was the industry's attempt at like getting away from that name, was to call it a security engineer, a security researcher.
Crazy, man. I have one suspicion that guys like Zoom, they have a lot of infrastructure, so they are watching nodes with different clients, bots, tools. Do you think that's a reality?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of tooling out there. I just, because I'm not, so in like Web2 security, there's this like idea of like a red team or a pen tester, and then there's a incident response team, which is like, for those the people who are like trying to protect your assets internally at the company, they're like doing security internally. And then there's another team usually that's like, okay, we've been hacked, now what do we do, right? I don't do any of the incident response stuff. And in fact, I've seen a lot of conversations in very many different places about people saying, like, that's a massive business opportunity in the space, I think, is to like start your own incident response team or something like that, because these hacks are happening all the time and they're like very huge when they do happen. But so I'm not doing any of that incident response stuff myself, but I do know there's a lot of tooling out there. And since Paradigm is an investor in all these companies, right, it's like their money is also on the line if a project gets hacked. So I could imagine that they're both using a lot of this incident response tooling and also building it out themselves internally.
Anybody has questions in the voice chat? I'll open the mic.
Yes, I have a question. Hi Jackson, since you had an experience with machine learning and turned into crypto, which is very similar to my history, do you get FOMO right now about machine learning? Like, do you ever want to like leave everything and switch to machine learning with all the attention right now, machine learning? Because like for the past 2 weeks, I subscribe to like I'm getting the popular repos of GitHub every day, daily GitHub repos.
Yeah, I get that too.
All of the repos are about machine learning. Not one crypto. I mean, not one anything else. Everything is machine learning, and I see like someone just train a simple model and put like $10 fee, like you change your profile picture, like upload your CV and get a professional. It's like just a trained model. Like, so what do you think about that? Because like I am like sometimes like, should I switch back to machine learning or like?
Yeah, in fact, when somebody was asking if I could go back and do it all over again, the reason I paused is I was like, do I? Because I had never thought about that question before until they said it, and then I was like, do I regret not doing ML? But so Zach talks about this in his interview with Andy, in fact. So he sold his media publishing company, and that was kind of how he eventually ended up in crypto. He did the same thing I did for whatever it was 6 years ago, where he was like, okay, there's ML and there's crypto. These are the two nascent technologies, so how do I decide between these two? And even he made the same decision, I think it was like a year ago, to get into smart contract auditing instead of ML. And he said kind of the same thing that was my experience, which is like, there's a lot of gatekeeping in ML, where it's like, if you don't have a PhD in statistics or ML or whatever, you're not going to get hired at, like I said, at Amazon, they never would have let me become a data scientist or a ML scientist or anything like that, because I didn't have a PhD, which was stupid. It's like, I could have very easily, and I watched guys leave Amazon who are like really, really good machine learning people, but they would not move them into that role, and they kept them as a software engineer instead. I do think because of the Cambrian explosion of like these LLMs, that people are, it's starting to become more of a hacker thing and less of a gatekeeped academic thing. And so it might actually make more sense now than it did 6 years ago to make that transition. I would say for me, where I'm kind of at in my life and my career, I think I talked about this either with my interview with Alex or Andy, I can't remember. But I like I made enough money at Amazon and like through investing in crypto and all this stuff that like I don't really give a shit about like any of that anymore. And I'm just like, what do I want to do and what's fun and what am I enjoying every day? I'm not like trying to strategize in terms of like what's gonna be the most effective way for me to like, grow my career or start a business or what, any of that stuff. And for me, I find much more joy and entertainment working in the crypto space than I think that I would working in the machine learning space. And I also have learned like kind of lately in my life that like I'm okay having like other people do like amazing shit and I don't have to be the one doing it. I think it's part of the reason I'm a really good investor is because I'm willing to be like, that's super dope and I'm going to fund you to go like work on that really dope idea. And I don't need to be like, there's only so many hours in the day I can spend as an engineer. And so to scale my sort of decisions, the only way to do it is through capital. And so I'm totally okay being like a consumer of these ML applications and just like basking in the wonder of like, wow, like I know how they work, right? But I'm not like an expert. I couldn't go do self-driving myself or anything like that, right? So I'm totally okay with like just being a consumer of amazing ML and everything like that, and like just continuing to work in the space that I find the most sort of fulfilling. I also think that there's a bit of like a political dichotomy between these two systems. Peter Thiel talks about this a lot, where he says something like ML is communist and crypto is capitalist or something to that effect. And I really do actually believe in that, and I really do believe in the ideals of like crypto and like like the whole Coinbase mantra of like economic freedom for everybody, all that stuff. I really believe in, and I think if the whole AI singularity thing that everybody's so worried about is going to come to pass, it might be the case that the only way of humans continuing to like interact and like doing things on the internet is going to be through cryptography. Assuming like a singular AI is not able to break those cryptographic primitives, that might be our only protection against super strong AI. And so in a sense, I feel like I am kind of defending against AI by working in cryptography in some way.
So what I think is like either ML is going to be is having a clubhouse moment, right? I mean, like it will be 6 months famous and then everybody forgets about it because like who is going to read all the stuff that AI generates, or like how can you have so much profile pictures that AI generates? So or either it will take all of the jobs. Like I think you have seen the OpenAI report of the which sectors AI is going to diminish or something like that, and it says blockchain engineer 100%.
See, that's one thing I will say. Like one of my coworkers on Thursday, we were having a one-on-one, and he was asking me about like, have you seen GPT-4? He was like, apparently it can find smart contract bugs, and like, are you worried about that or whatever? And I was like, I don't know if you saw the tweet from the Coinbase. It was like a Coinbase executive or whatever had fed a smart contract to GPT-4, and it had found a bug. Did you see that?
No,
I saw it.
but
Okay. Okay, so
I'm using GPT-4. Like sometimes it's very good, and sometimes it just makes things up.
Exactly. So that's where I was heading with this, right? That tweet went viral, and everybody was like, "Holy shit!" And I could even made it. We have an internal Slack channel at Robinhood called Crypto News, and people dump random news that they find. And this was one of the things. Like it had permeated so far that even the employees at Robinhood were like, "Wow, can you believe this thing? Wow, it's amazing." So I was like, "Okay, well, I need to look into this." It was a underflow. It was an underflow exploit. So first of all, it fed it a contract with an old compiler version where you could still have underflows, which nobody's doing anymore. Second of all, those are like trivially easy to find in the smart contract audit. So even if somehow the developer had managed to use an old version of Solidity and gotten that bug in there, I'm almost positive it would have been found by a smart contract auditor, right? So it's like, okay. But that said, right, it's like, if you would have asked me even 2 years ago, would an AI be able to even find smart contract underflow bug, I would have been like, no way in hell. And it's able to find those, right? And so it's very easy to say, okay, this is stupid and it's like a toy and it can't do anything. But that's how all giant technologies start out as kind of like joke toy things, and then pretty soon they're taking over the entire world. I think more than anything, what OpenAI has done is it has inspired a bunch of people, which means that there's going to be a lot of people moving into the space, a lot of talented individuals moving into the space. There's going to be a lot of capital and VCs putting money behind that, and probably 90% of those VCs are going to lose money on their bets. But that's going to start the flywheel and get the flywheel moving, such that I think I'm highly confident that we're going to be in the second case that you talked about and not in the first case. I think in the short term, probably in like a year or so, it's going to appear like a Clubhouse moment, and we're all going to be like, yeah, remember that? And then probably within the next, if you extrapolate farther into the next 3 to 5 years, then it is going to be as big a shift because people tend to do that. They do that even in crypto, right? People tend to get hyped up too early, too quickly on really stupid ideas. Like DeFi is a good example, like I said about ETHLend, right? At the time I was like, this is stupid, it's never going to work. And it wasn't in the phase that it was at. It was a stupid idea, but it only took people playing around with ideas and figuring it out for another 2 or 3 years before you have this massive multi-billion dollar industry. I think the same thing is going to happen. People in the short term are going to think, wow, this is amazing, it can do everything. It's gonna disappoint a lot of people over the next 6 to 12 months. But then I think there is really a massive trend here, and like people really do need to be worried about losing jobs and stuff like that. That said, I think we've always had these sort of Cambrian explosions where like the term Luddite came from the spinning loom or whatever, right? The people leaving yarns were pissed off that during the Industrial Revolution we figured out a way of like making clothes without them, and so they went in and started burning all the factories and stuff like that, right? I think it's going to suck probably for 5 to 10 years, yes, but eventually we're going to find other ways of doing work that don't involve AI, things like that. Assuming it doesn't destroy humanity.
So what I think is like it's going to be like a Clubhouse month for 6 months, and then like the AR Apple Glass will come and like or something else, or then people like flock in those things, or maybe combination. But like 5 years later, it's going to be hit very hard, like maybe in a robot shape, or maybe in a artificial general intelligence shape. That's what I'm thinking. But yeah.
Yeah, Tesla's working on like a personal robot as well. Yeah, we'll see. It's interesting. I mean, for me, more than anything, it's very exciting. I'm happy that it's all happening.
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody got more questions? Well, bro, I guess this is it. I want to thank you so much, man, for coming up here today and sharing all the knowledge with us. It was dope.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Man. Here we're pretty much just doing interviews, sharing knowledge. So feel free to come around. And
definitely, absolutely, yeah. This is awesome what you're starting up for sure.
Thanks, man. Thank you so much, Jackson. And everybody follow him right now and send him a DM saying thank you and thank you, bro. Okay?
Don't DM me.
Don't DM him. Don't DM. Just say general chat. Okay?
No, just kidding. Feel free to DM.
Awesome.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, everybody enjoy your weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.